I did talk a little bit in the taking stock uh, episode about the Western philosophers, Western political thinkers who I don't think are totalitarians, or that I'm not going to devote an episode to because I don't think they fit into this pantheon. I mean, I am asserting that totalitarianism is the basic strand of Western political philosophy. Right? But not everything can be tarred with this brush. For example, there are anarchist thinkers in the West. Now, they're not usually considered to have classic status, and they might just be indulged in generously for a moment of hand waving, I think Kropotkin is the best of the anarchist philosophers. Or I would teach, as I've said, Thoreau, civil disobedience. Okay. But those things do emerge in Western philosophy. And for example, Lysander Spooner, the American individualist anarchist, got to his anarchism through extreme applications of Lockean classical liberalism, which is very plausible, actually. Like, if you really took the basic insights of Locke, you might not end up with a government. I'd say this is true of Rawls, too. I've been doing this on videos. But okay. The classical liberals are not, the anarchists are not totalitarians. If you're wondering, the anarchists are the opposite of totalitarians. And classical liberals, I'm saying, are not, or classical Republicans, even a la Machiavelli. Like I say, Machiavelli wants Cesare Borgia to take over Italy and rule it with an iron fist. Okay. But his ideal is ancient republicanism. So classical idealists like Kant, Habermas, Rawls, Mill, Locke, did I say Kant, are not totalitarians, but I want to get worried about them. And I've done some videos on this too, the series that I did on Western conceptions of freedom, philosophical conceptions of freedom. An amazingly disturbing history, where everyone wants to just define freedom as obedience. It's really sad. And you're going to have to find an anarchist to do some work like that, because if you're trusting these statists and totalitarians to define freedom, you're going to be a slave. Now, okay, so, but I think, and this is an attempt partly to pay off on this idea that totalitarianism of various kinds is fundamental to Western political speculation, as well as Western political reality, of course, is that the classical liberal democratic, as we call it now, or Republican style politics, a lot of it rests on a single gigantic insight that we've come across over and over already, in particular in the thing on Rousseau, but also on Hegel, and also in Hobbes, the idea that the law of states, or even the moral law, is legitimate insofar as you give that law to yourself. The definition of freedom as being the lawgiver of yourself. Now, I think you start to feel this in Hobbes, who has the idea that if you get apprehended by the authorities and punished, you are punishing yourself because you have agreed to that authority. But he doesn't And he gives you this picture of all of us combining into a single person. All right, but he doesn't really develop this thought squarely that freedom should be defined as being the lawgiver of yourself, and the way we should characterize that is being a lawgiver of yourself is thoroughly internalizing the moral law or the law of states. And in the political context, the law of states, the law of the state you're in. Internalizing it so thoroughly that you can convince yourself that it's not the enforcement mechanisms externally to you that are leading you to obey this law. It's your own. You have given yourself this law, or you are the author of this law. And that's freedom. And this is the fundamental way that freedom and individualism and freedom and individual rights can be squared with government authority to whatever extent you like. A mellow democratic Bill of Rights kind of thing, or the dictatorship of anything, the dictatorship of whatever class you like or whatever, okay? As long as you've internalized the rules, the authority around you, you are perfectly free. So we've seen this Rousseau is just beautiful in this, and Kant and Hegel just get this straight out of Rousseau and hit it as hard as humanly possible. This idea that you're going to be completely restrained, completely forced by the government in every respect, and you have no remaining rights. And you will be completely free because you have accepted the laws that will be enforced upon you. In fact, that's the very definition of freedom, is that you have internalized the laws that are operated upon your body. And so again, you're not unfree when you're in prison because you've agreed to the laws by which you have been in prison. Of course, you might not have agreed, but you've agreed tacitly anyway, or whatever, okay. This is the central conception of freedom in the liberal tradition. And it's, okay, so, and it has like clear totalitarian implications, all right? So I get worried about classical liberalism too. Here's a nice, how about this book? A Spirit of Trust by Robert Brandom. I wrote a review of this for the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I read every page of it. It's incredible, man. It's about Hegel, basically, and pragmatism. Robert Brandom, the great Robert Brandom, the amazing Robert Brandom. I think he and I are two of the 5 dissertations that were supervised by Richard Rorty in the course of his career. So, hi, Robert Brandom. This is a nice, and this is a central thought in here, a spirit of trust. And this is a nice summary of this idea that, and it's endorsed by Brandom. I mean, it's endorsed by everybody, really, okay? This idea of lawgiver of yourself as the essence of freedom. Let me read you this from pages 264 and 5 of Robert Brandom's A Spirit of Trust. Hegel picks up a further strand of the early modern tradition of theorizing about normativity. That's exactly the way Habermas would put this too. And his book, Between Facts and Norms, leans everything on this idea too. This is the perfectionist self-government tradition, running from Montaigne through Descartes and Leibniz. So think about how central these figures are. Through the Cambridge Platonists and some of their British sentimentalist heirs, culminating in the idea of normativity normativity in terms of autonomy that Kant develops out of Rousseau's notion of freedom. So we're doing a wide swath of intellectual history very quickly and elucidating one of the central concepts in Western political thought, one that you would not immediately associate with totalitarianism, but which has totalitarian implications. And it's also like wildly false, bizarrely ridiculous. Okay, I keep saying that about a lot of these ideas, right? This is the idea that, quote, obedience to a law one has prescribed for oneself is freedom. That's a quote from Rousseau. We've seen this. And Kant endorses this thought about freedom, again thought of as a classical liberal thinker, and puts it to a new use, distinguishing normative constraint characterized by freedom from non-normative compulsion. According to this line of thought, one is genuinely normatively bound only by norms one has oneself acknowledged as normatively binding. So this sounds like it really is a individualist, rights-oriented defense of freedom. One is genuinely normatively bound only by norms one has oneself acknowledged as normatively binding. This makes the status of being a normative subject, being liable to assessment according to norms, an essentially self-conscious achievement. I can be held to norms because I am conscious of endorsing those very norms. For taking oneself to be normatively bound, shows up as an essential component of being normatively bound. And Kant takes over from Rousseau the idea that of such self-conscious self-binding by norms as the very form of positive freedom. This could almost be a quote from Habermas as well. To be free in Kant's sense of autonomous is to have the authority to bind oneself constitutively, to make oneself responsible just by taking oneself to be responsible. This coincidence of normativity, self-consciousness, and freedom is the beating heart of German idealism, what Heidegger meant when he referred to, quote, the dignity and spiritual greatness of German idealism. Are we sure he didn't just mean the secret destiny of the Prussian state, as expressed by Adolf Hitler? It is of the essence of Hegel's development of Kant that he takes it that free, self-conscious, normative subjectivity, in this sense, is a social achievement, something intelligible in principle, only by focusing on the we and not just the I. So Brandom describes Hegel's version of this as taking it out of the realm of individuality and into the realm of collectivities. I guess collective agents also can be the lawgivers of themselves. So I don't have to be bound by my own endorsement of the law. I'm bound by our endorsement for the law, even though I'm telling you that I don't endorse it at all. So much of the Western tradition is an attempt to make freedom compatible with necessity, make freedom compatible with oppressive state power. That's the actual goal. That's what compatibilism is for the consensus view on the metaphysics of free will. So, I guess I think that's a good passage because it summarizes like the long run of this idea and the centrality of it, to Hobbes to begin with. And then, I see the same history, Rousseau, Kant, and then the English classical liberals are not quite on this cosmic wavelength of lawgiver of yourself. Hobbes does a version of it. I think Locke and Mill don't really don't indulge this view in this way. But But let me, I mean, okay. Maybe I'm giving myself the categorical imperative. That is, I'm giving myself the moral law that's prescribed by God. Okay? Or I'm giving myself the golden rule. Or I'm giving myself the principle of utility or something like this. Okay? Now, one thing I want you to notice is that all those things are totally external to myself. Right? Like, I didn't make up utilitarianism. If I endorse utilitarian moral philosophy, I'm accepting something from outside, okay, from Mill and Bentham or whatever. You know, if I accept the categorical imperative as Kant formulates it, I am accepting, the fundamental groundwork of the metaphysics of morals of Immanuel Kant. I'm not making up my own principles and imposing them on myself. So this idea of lawgiver of yourself, it simply means accepting external law. It means that for everyone who uses this concept, it means being a lawgiver of yourself means accepting external law. It means that to Rousseau. It means that to Hobbes. It means that to Brandom. It means that to Habermas. It means that to Kant. So, the first thing I want to say about the idea that I am giving myself the categorical imperative, or that I am giving myself the U.S. criminal code, is that that's fucking bullshit. I mean, you're just this whole history, the whole history of Western political speculation is this kind of it's this crazy making shit up, like just telling stories, making fables, hitting you as hard as they can with the most fictional shit you can imagine. Stuff that you know is fictional, that they know is fictional. Lawgiver of myself. Right. That's what you want from your citizens? I obey only the principles that I recognize. If there was someone like that, they'd be manacled to a wall in your dungeon, Immanuel Kant. Okay? Fucking Hegel. Okay? You don't want people to be the lawgiver of yourself. And this is so dishonest. It's so disingenuous. These people are so insincere, grossly dishonest. These are liars. Okay? I'm not saying that they haven't managed to fool themselves in some way to believe that if I totally internalize the laws that you are imposing on my body, that I am perfectly free. I'm not saying that Hegel and Rousseau and Kant and Habermas and Brandom didn't work themselves up into some kind of tizzy where they thought of themselves that they believed that. Okay? The myth givers of themselves, these people are the fiction givers of themselves, the sci-fi authors of themselves. Okay? Authors of the law that is operated upon me. Now, that has a totalitarian implication, and this is well explored in Foucault and elsewhere in critiques of liberalism, in that the whole idea is to make me the agent of my own oppression. That's the essence of classical liberalism, especially in this German vein. To make me the agent of my own oppression. To claim that I am the government that imprisons me and shit like this, okay? So now this is, that's a totalitarian move. It wants the state to be in or to be the head of every person in the state. It pretends that the state is each person. Now that's a sick totalitarian fantasy, and it's just bullshit, okay? Like, I have various principles that I give myself. But the government doesn't know what they are and doesn't have to know what they are. And the government gives me many principles that I just reject totally or whatever. But I guess I've tacitly accepted or whatever. Okay. Man, this is one of the central ideas or lines of thought in Western political thinking. It's one of the most enduring, and it's just simply in your face bullshit. And it has grotesque totalitarian implications. And the history of classical liberalism as a practical political philosophy starts with a kind of small state democratic set of norms. I mean, you see this in some, especially Mill Locke versions of classical liberalism, let's say, or the U.S. founders' versions of classical liberalism. And it gets more and more, to where the classical liberal states have governments that control 50% of the GDP and are getting toward 80 or whatever, where the classical liberal polities have thousands of laws on the books that they're enforcing willy-nilly or randomly on various people. All right. So I say, like, classical liberal polities have been moving slowly in a totalitarian direction for 200-300 years. And this is a guideline. The lawgiver of yourself jive is a guideline for how to do that and how to make sure that the whole thing is what you should do is install the government in your head and erase any values you might have that are extraneous to that. All right, classical liberals, man, like, I'm not exactly saying that you're totalitarians because you don't just endorse, like, dictatorship, or straight up, like, because you have a word or two to say for rights and freedoms and stuff like this. Thank you. I appreciate that, because there's a lot of worse stuff out there. But this is a terrifying and obviously false thought at the heart of your politics, classical liberals.